Soon we pass the first Romanian village. We look curiously at the buildings and people. What is it like abroad? The village is like a village, not much different from the villages in Ukraine, where we have travelled many hundreds of kilometres. The population looks at us with curiosity, not showing any particular joy, but there is no hostility either, although Romania fought against us on the side of fascist Germany. Still, in comparison with Ukrainian villages, Romanian villages looked more prosperous here. Probably the Germans robbed less, after all, allies. Our troops rolled up in columns and moved forward at the highest possible speed. I, as Chief of Intelligence of the division, gathered the platoon commanders of battery control platoons with their scouts and organised something like a forward-out outpost, or rather, a reconnaissance group. We were all on horseback, so we moved faster than our foot columns and our batteries, which were on horseback in general columns in readiness for immediate deployment and support by fire if the situation demanded. Our division commander assigned us the task of reconnoitring the enemy and reporting in a timely manner. Almost without stopping we went forward. Night time was also maximally used for movement. Only for 4 to 5 hours we had a break to give rest to both men and horses, and then we went forward again. Sometimes on the way of our movement we could see separately standing farmsteads somewhere away from the road. The local people said that it was the house of a boyar, obviously a Romanian landowner. We of course did not pass by. We looked into these estates. There could be an enemy there, and it would not hurt to have some food and refreshment for the horses. At best, they found a few workers, obviously labourers. The landowners themselves fled to the cities. All the boyar estates had large stone cellars where grape wine was stored in large barrels. We enjoyed tasting it, snacking on something and continuing forward. Our way was to the south of Romania, past the towns of Băialad, Bacău, which were visible off our route, bypassing the mountain range from the south. Ahead was Bucharest. Our troops in solid columns marched along the roads. Columns of cars with guns on the trailer, Katyusha rocket launchers, cars with ammunition and various cargoes. Here in parallel mounted columns with guns, as well as squadrons of General Plev's cavalry corps. Infantry units moved usually along the roadsides, away from the road and parallel to it tank columns. The roads were literally clogged with troops. All uncontrollably rushed forward. If the offensive develops successfully, there is some kind of excited moral and psychological mood in the troops, all rushing forward, often overtaking the forward units. However, meeting resistance, these daredevils turn around and run back with no less haste, sometimes creating a panic mood, especially in the rear units. Somewhere on the outskirts of Bucharest, the enemy resisted our troops. Our units deployed in combat order. In the area of the village of Alesti was a stubborn battle that lasted all day. Even in the morning, at 10 o'clock, the commander of the German division, General Zelter, sent us parliamentarians with a proposal of truce. However, the terms of our ultimatum and surrender did not suit him. The battle resumed with renewed vigour and lasted all day. The enemy lost in this battle 500 men killed, 56 men were taken prisoner. Our division lost here 77 men killed, more than 150 were wounded. By evening the enemy began to withdraw. I with my scouts went forward, following our infantry. Closer to midnight the infantry stopped for rest, together with it and we here on the field in small, hastily dug trenches lay down to rest. Closer to dawn the infantry moved forward, followed by us. We walked along the road, hardly overcoming sleep. For a while both I and my scouts fell asleep on the move, scattered all over the road. I shuddered at the sound of a broken corn stalk, in which I had wandered in my sleep. When I woke up, I saw my scouts sleepily walking wherever they were. I was surprised to see a fresh trench ahead in the pre-dawn gloom at a distance of literally 50 metres. Only I had time to fall to the ground and shout, "Get down," as a machine gun burst sounded. We had run into the enemy's combat guard. Sleep was immediately driven off. Fortunately, none of my scouts were injured. Even in their sleep they executed my command, "Lie down," without delay, just a moment before the machine gun burst. We crawled back through the cornfield. Our infantry was nowhere to be seen. As it turned out later, it stopped about 500 metres behind, as the soldiers literally fell asleep from fatigue. We dozed off on the move and did not notice it. For the first time I slept on the move, and it turns out that such a thing is possible. The battalion, with which we were advancing, deployed in combat order and soon engaged the enemy. I radioed the division commander with the situation. Our batteries took up firing positions, supporting the fire of guns infantry. The enemy resisted for a short time. Soon my scouts reported that he was retreating. The infantry went up to the attack. Together with it, we moved and soon entered the village where the enemy had spent the night. In this battle, distinguished gun commander of the regimental battery of the 6th Airborne Regiment, Petty Officer K. Karachkov, who entered the village where the enemy had spent the night. A. Karachkov, who entered into an unequal struggle with a large group of fascists. He destroyed more than 25 Hitlerites with the fire of the gun. It came to hand fighting. 3 fascists piled on him, but the petty officer managed to come out of this deadly fight victorious. All 3 were destroyed by him. Karachkov was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Continuing the pursuit, our division reached the area 15 kilometers north of Bucharest. Large warehouses with various property and food were captured. Our petty officer loaded the wagons with various cans, boxes, crates with food. As it turned out later, the boxes contained additional rations for officers of the German army, a pack of cookies, a plastic jar with marmalade, a pack of cigarettes and others. The jars turned out to be processed cheese. We at first thought it was soap, and only then someone tasted it and realized it was cheese. My scouts brought me a bicycle with a motor. I started it up, got on the saddle and rode forward. I rode about 15 kilometers, and the road diverged into 2 sides. I stopped and waited for 3 hours for our convoy to arrive. I gave my bicycle to someone and got on my faithful horse. Our division was awarded the title of Bucharest for excellence in the battles on the outskirts of Bucharest, and the entire staff was announced the gratitude of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. In Bucharest there was an uprising against the fascist regime of Antonescu. On the side of the rebels was King Mihai, who at that moment played a positive role. Romania withdrew from the alliance with Germany and declared war on it. Stalin awarded Mihai with the newly established highest order of victory. It was strange to see how the Romanian division, which was retreating in front of our front, suddenly stopped, met our troops, joined the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front, and began to act against its yesterday's ally together with our troops. At one of the forks of the road we saw a passenger car in which sat a Romanian general, the division commander. 20 Romanian soldiers took turns pushing the general's car. Obviously he had no gasoline in his car. Romanian troops operated in the neighborhood of our division almost until the end of the war. My scouts brought a beautiful 2-seater sports car of red color. They said they took it in the garage at the Bucharest airfield. We drive with glamour on the highway. Behind the wheel is one of the scouts, though he drives uncertainly, but there is no other. The car is long. 2 or 3 more scouts have settled down in the back, right on the hood, holding on to the seats, where the chauffeur and I have settled down. Everybody wanted to go for a ride, at least some fun in the front life, and besides, none of us had never driven a passenger car in our lives. Almost until the evening we rode along the roads. Not going far ahead there we could run into the enemy. The target is noticeable, but we don't go back. We would be caught by the bosses and the car would be taken away, which happened in the evening. The commander of our division saw us and took us out of the car. We had to get on our faithful horses. About a day or 2 later I happened to see this car. Someone of the division commander's cronies was already riding in it. We continue to move forward quickly. Daily march of 25 to 30 kilometers overlap twice. It is not easy, especially for infantry. By evening soldiers fall from fatigue. To withstand such a pace is simply not human strength, but even here worked soldiers' ingenuity. In each company got wagons with horses, put their soldiers' bags, overcoats and other heavy things. The soldiers take turns resting on the wagons, and it gives relief, and most importantly allows you to move at double speed compared to the statutory. One day, acting ahead of our troops about 15 kilometers away, we caught up with a rather large convoy wagons loaded with various goods and foodstuffs, as well as oats for horses, a large number of horses, a whole herd, not less than 100. It was accompanied by Romanian soldiers and officers. As it later became known, the senior man there was a Romanian colonel. We were met quite hostilely. We had to fire a few bursts in the air with automatic rifles and a hand machine gun, which we always had with us. The Romanians realized that they could not negotiate with us by force, although they were 4 times as many as we were, if not more. Apparently this convoy was retreating with the German troops, not knowing that Romania had capitulated and declared war on Germany. We demanded from the Romanian colonel unconditional surrender, and I ordered him to line up all his subordinates. The colonel tried to object, but we did not know Romanian, and he and his subordinates did not know Russian. We had to explain in the soldiers' jargon. My scouts quickly disarmed the colonel and officers and arrested them. All the soldiers of the convoy were lined up, their weapons and ammunition were seized. Someone of the Romanian soldiers knew a little Russian. As it turned out, he was a Moldovan. They explained to him that Romania had capitulated and declared war on Germany, and suggested that he inform all his soldiers about it. Those, having learned about the events, cheerfully buzzed. I explained to our interpreter that from his soldiers he should appoint a guard and wait for the approach of our troops. We demanded to be shown the horses. The Romanian officers and their colonel were buzzing. Our interpreter reported that the horses were from the stables of the King of Romania and his cronies. I said something like King Mihai won't be offended by us. Anyway, we picked out the horses we liked and moved forward. My frontline friend Kazimir Kaminsky suggested that I race my horses. I agreed, and we raced on the cobblestone road. Kazimierz had a powerful Nesta stallion. I had a beautiful, slender, grey in apples. The horses had good English saddles and beautiful harness. We rush as fast as we can. My stallion overtakes the rival and suddenly, at full gallop, stumbles, falls on his front legs and turns over from head to croup. I flew out of the saddle and hit the cobblestone so that I lost consciousness for a while. When I woke up, the scouts lifted me up and poured water from a flask on my head. I hardly remembered what had happened. I am covered in mud. I was saved by a big puddle with a decent layer of thick mud. Otherwise, obviously, it would have ended sadly. My horse is standing on the opposite side of the ditch, all shivering. His front legs, knees and head are broken. I asked the soldiers to calm him down and take him on a harness. My bruised right leg and arm hurt badly. My trusty staff horse was brought up. With the help of the orderly climbed into the saddle, I could not hold the bridle reins with my right hand. Slowly went forward. The desire to race was gone. We reached the nearest village, rested there and waited for the approach of our division. Our Dr. Vasya Lisniansky examined and felt my limbs and concluded that they were intact and the pain from the bruise would soon pass. Horse Dr. Shemendiuk examined my trophy horse and concluded that the horse had once been planted on its front legs, i.e., it had once been given cold water immediately after a race, i.e., hot water. This is what caused her legs to fail during a race and to go haywire. Outwardly, this condition is not noticeable and only manifests itself during races. The horse was treated and she stayed with me as a spare for quiet riding. She was very slender and beautiful, and of course what cavalryman would not tremble at the sight of such a horse? In later life I sometimes harnessed her, arousing the envy of others. She was well trained, especially in spectacular, beautiful types of allure, and loved to canter and demonstrate her abilities. I had the horse almost until the end of the war. Then I, together with the battery, handed her over to my successor Ivan Kulikov. Fast forward to the west. Ahead is the town of Craiova. We pass it late in the evening. We stop for the night somewhere outside the town. In the morning we go forward again, to the Danube. One of the days we approach the river in the morning. The Danube in this place is squeezed by the banks. On our side there are rather high rocks, vertically cliffing to the river, and at the bottom of the rocks along the river there is a highway. This place is called Iron Gate. In the morning we start moving along this road. On the left the river, quite wide in this place, on the right a rocky ridge rises vertically upwards. These gates stretch for several kilometres. We just drove to the shore, as from the opposite side began machine gun fire on our column. On the other bank of the Yugoslavia there is the enemy, and although the opposite bank is almost a kilometre away, and enemy bullets are clicking somewhere higher, on the rocks, it is still unpleasant to move under the aim of machine guns. The division commander ordered to turn one gun and give a few shots in the direction of the machine guns. Apparently, the explosions of our shells convinced the enemy of the futility of shelling our column. In any case, the firing stopped, and we safely passed the iron gate. Soon the coastal town of Timisoara appeared. The enemy from the opposite shore fired machine guns and mortars at our troops. One of the Katyushas turned around and fired a volley at the opposite bank. There rose a sea of fire and smoke. We are safely passing the city. Now the direction to the northwest. Soon the road went along the foothills. The heights on the right and left are covered with dense coniferous forest. These are the Southern Carpathians. Airborne regiment, which supports our division, took up defences along the outskirts of the Romanian village. It is ordered not to move forward, although the enemy does not resist in this area, and in general, it is obviously not nearby. For a few days we stand in defence, providing the rest of the division and army to get to the Southern Carpathians. The personnel had a good rest, slept well, put themselves weapons, military equipment in order, horses rested. On one of the days I was called by the division commander and set the task to get food. Everything that could be procured in the village was bought and eaten. It was clear that it was impossible to solve this task on the spot, as well as in the nearest villages where our troops were standing. Supply bases were left somewhere far behind, and it was impossible to count on planned supply. I reported my plan to the division commander, and at first he started to object, as the plan was quite risky. I proposed to create a group, 20 men on horseback and a dozen wagons, and go forward, that is, behind the front line, in the direction of the enemy. After thinking about it, the commander agreed, realizing that it would be difficult to find anything behind. Such a group was formed. It included, in addition to me, 2 platoon commanders, Lieutenants Diminsky and Dunaevsky, as well as scouts of the division and batteries. We had assault rifles, several wagons. The men riding on the wagons had carbines and there were 2 hand machine guns. All had a couple of grenades each. In the afternoon our detachment went forward. We warned our infantry not to take us for the enemy on the way back, moving along the highway. On the right and left to the road comes a thick coniferous forest. We look carefully ahead and around. After all, we are behind the front line and there can be any surprises. Ahead, about 200 kilometers away, is the Romanian town of Lugos, and we are on our way to it. Soon the forest parted, and ahead, about a kilometer, showed the outskirts of the town, which looked more like a large village, but in the distance, obviously in the centre, could see a few buildings of urban type. We stopped, lay down, with binoculars we scrutinized the outskirts. Right in front of us there is a fairly wide and straight street, apparently to the centre of the city. We lie down for half an hour, no enemy detected, no defensive structures, at least no trenches. But the street is deserted, not a soul, and this is an unpleasant sign. Some reason keeps the population in the houses. Most likely there is an enemy in the city. I decide to move forward, counting on surprise. We obviously have not yet had time to be detected, and therefore surprise is a chance for us. I instruct everyone we gallop down the street into the city, and if we meet resistance, turn around 180 degrees back. The machine gunners must cover the retreat. At full gallop down the street, it's a 90-degree turn to the right. That's where we're going. Ahead, obviously the central square, all of it filled with people, all turned and looking in our direction, someone waving a red flag. From surprise we were even frightened. We expected the enemy, and here is a huge crowd of civilians, most of whom are women, many children. We restrain our horses, heated by the gallop. From the crowd comes out a tall grey-haired old man, next to him a few more people, obviously the city authorities. The old man is holding a tray with bread and salt. The crowd is buzzing with excitement and cheer. We dismount, approach the old man and his assistants. In broken Russian-Romanian language, the old man welcomed the Red Army into the city. As it turned out later, it was the local headman, although he was dressed in simple peasant clothes, while his attendants were dressed in urban style. After eating the bread and salt, I thanked the townspeople for the warm welcome. And of course the first thing I asked was whether there were any Germans in town. I was told that the Germans left the city 3 days ago, and now there are no enemy soldiers here. My heart was relieved. There is jubilation in the town square. Our soldiers are surrounded by people. Treats, kisses, someone sings our song Katyusha, desperately twisting the words. It is hard to imagine that just a week ago Romania was an ally of Germany and fought against us. But politics is politics, and here were ordinary people, to whom war brings only misfortune. The jubilation was sincere, genuine, heartfelt. We felt it well. Ordinary people, as we were, in fact, understand each other better and more sincerely than politicians. Several Romanians came up to me, well-dressed, and it was immediately obvious that they were not ordinary townspeople. Among them is a tall, grey-haired old man I already know. In broken Russian, he introduces me the director of the school, the head of the local police, the director of the store, etc. I greet them all by the hand. I ask the old man where he learned Russian. However, his vocabulary and accent are such that I have to guess what he is talking about. The old man answers that during the First World War he was in Russian captivity, and then he learned to speak Russian a little, but 18 years have passed and much, of course, has been forgotten. After the official ceremony of acquaintance with the local nobility, I call the old man aside and ask him to buy food. He quickly agrees, calls someone, obviously from the city administration, and instructs him to allocate food. I call up the foreman and direct him to get the food. I warned him that I would pay for it. We had already been given Romanian lea money. The headmaster comes up to me and tries to explain something, invites me somewhere. Neither I nor my officers can understand his request. Our Romanian vocabulary is limited to a few household-level phrases. We cannot find a common concept. Soon a young girl is brought in who speaks Russian quite well. It turned out that before the war she had lived in Chisinau for 2 years, and there she had learned to speak and understand Russian. She translated to me that the local society is inviting Russian officers to a banquet on the occasion of the Red Army's entry into the city. I try to explain that we are only a small reconnaissance group, and the main troops will be later, but they are not embarrassed by this, and neither are we, and besides we are already hungry, and it is not at all unreasonable to eat. Of course we are not trained in any official etiquette, and what a banquet is, we have a vague idea, especially since we have been at the front for more than 2.5 years, and we have no time for etiquette. The 3 of us go to the school director's house, where, as we were told, a festive table is set. It is not far from where we rallied. A long table is set in the room, according to our front concepts with exquisite dishes and utensils. Only men are present. Besides those already familiar to us, there is the local priest and 2 or 3 other men. By right of the host they are represented by the headmaster. He says something, followed by the mayor. We listen attentively, though we understand nothing, but obviously they are saluting the Red Army. I stand up and make a return speech, a few words of gratitude for the warm welcome, in the sense that we expected to run into the enemy, but ran into pleasant hospitality. Anyway, we exchanged toasts. We drank a small shot of Romanian Tissa. This is Romanian vodka, light yellow colour, 25 to 30 degrees. The shot glasses are tiny, on long legs, slightly larger than a thimble. It's the first time I've seen them. We are used to drinking from a soldier's mug, and more often from a tin can, and much stronger drinks vodka or alcohol, but here is Tissa, and even in mosquito doses. We don't know how to hold these shot glasses with our calloused hands, but we don't show it, as banquets seem to be a usual thing for us. Toasts sound to Stalin, to the Red Army, to King Mihai of Romania. Our hospitable hosts are getting hot, and we, as they say, have not a single eye in the world. I called up one of the girls serving the table and explained to her to bring a mug to pour the tuki into the decanters. She seems to have understood and soon brings a glass of 200 grams. I ask her to bring more, as much as there is. Soon the glasses appear. My platoon and I pour ourselves a glass, make a toast to those present at the table and drink to the bottom in friendship, without hesitation. The Romanians open their mouths and look at us with fright. We snack with pleasure and pour a second one. the tipsy Romanians became bolder and decided to follow our example, having seen that after the second one we were not feeling bad either. In general, the exchange of experience began how to drink in Russian. We taught the local aristocracy our customs. Soon the banquet turned into a merry feast. After a while, Petty Officer Bukov came and reported that the wagons were fully loaded with food and that they were charged 115 rubles in our money. I went outside and tried to pay. I take out a 100-ruble bill. On it, as you know, is written 10 chervonates and several tens, on which is written 1 chervonate. I give it to him. The Romanian looks at me with bewilderment, and I try to find out what's the matter. The headman present here says that it is necessary 115 rubles, and you give 12. I try to explain that a chervonates is a 10, but the word 1 is written on the money, and this perplexes the Romanians. I try to find a ruble to prove that we are not cheating them, but I don't have such a bill. I ask to find a girl from Chisinau to confirm our honesty in this situation. Soon she comes, but she also says that since it says 10, it means it is 10 rubles. In short, she did not help, but made the situation even more complicated. Called all his soldiers and asked them to go through their pockets and find a ruble. Soon someone brings a ruble. I show it to the Romanians. They understood, apologized, the incident was over. The foreman with the wagons moved in the opposite direction. We go with the headman to the house to wash off the deal. The feast is in full swing. The picture is quite amusing. Volodya Diminsky in an embrace with the chief of police trying to sing International, Yasha Dunaevsky in an embrace with a pop singer singing Katyusha. The rest are singing along, some to one, some to another. In general, the picture is idyllic. It got dark, we have to go back. On the way back, we organize a competition who will overtake whom. We race to our village at midnight. In the morning I learned that Volodya Diminsky lost on the way his uniform with documents and an order. It turns out that during the race he lost the bridle from the horse's head and does not know how and where it happened. There is no time to look for it at night. You do not want to lag behind. And without a bridle you cannot control the horse. He found a way out. He took off his overalls, slipped the horse's head into it, and used the sleeves as reins. But he lost it too. In the afternoon it was found by the Romanians and brought back safe and sound. The commander of the division scolded us in the morning, but not maliciously. We had accomplished the task. We had provided the division with food for several days. We were young, in our 20s, and of course reckless. A few days passed, and we received the order forward. Our route lay through the familiar town of Lugos. I illegally sent scouts ahead to warn the local authorities that the Red Army was approaching, as they had asked me to do at the first meeting. When our column entered the town along the street we already knew, the whole of it along the road was lined with tables with tsukka, wine and food. Every householder had brought out what he could. It was a kind of a long festive table on both sides of the road. The population invited everyone to the table with friendly cries. We did not have a rest here, but when the head of the column came to the centre, there was already waiting an official delegation of citizens with bread and salt. Familiar to us, Romanians welcomed the Red Army. We had to stop the column and accept congratulations. Naturally, our soldiers did not need to be invited twice. Everyone enjoyed themselves. The division commander, with a smile from under the floor, shows me a fist. I make an innocent look, say, I had nothing to do with it. He, of course, guessed that I had nothing to do with it. For almost an hour the unintended break lasted, and we moved on, leaving the friendly town with regret. Before and after that we were greeted with a generally almost indifferent look. At any rate, there was no such thing. We were now moving with the highest possible speed to the north, in the offensive zone of the Second Ukrainian Front. Our division provided the left flank of our front, since our neighbour on the left, the Third Ukrainian Front, had fallen far behind, liquidating the encircled Kishinev grouping of enemy troops. Our way lay to the city of Timisoara. The column entered it late in the evening. It is quite a big city, typical urban buildings, streetcar. In the centre, one of my wagons got into a streetcar track with its rear wheel. The wheel broke. It became impossible to drive. It was difficult to find another one at night. I had to spend the night. There was a tall building nearby, obviously a hotel, so we spent the night there. In the morning I went in search of a wheel. I don't remember where, but I found the wheel. However, my scouts were not there. More precisely, there was no Kolya Kushenko. As it turned out later, he was arrested by the commandant of the city. Soon I found the commandant's office. In the yard is my wagon, horses calmly chewing hay. I asked the soldier, "Where is my scout?" from the wagon. He confirmed that he was arrested by the commandant of the city, Lieutenant Colonel Altschuller. I went up to the second floor. A lieutenant colonel was coming towards me. I spoke to him. He confirmed that he was the military commandant of the city. I told him my situation and asked him why my soldier with the wagon had been detained. He said that the soldier was detained in the bazaar where he was selling honey and hit someone with a ladle. I asked him to let my soldier go and promised that I would sort it out and punish him, but now we had to catch up with our column faster and fulfill our combat mission. The commandant refused to let the soldier go, and please take the wagon. I, of course, could not leave without Kushenko. The commandant left for the railroad station, where several soldiers were loading some musical instruments and other property into the wagons. Among them was my Kushenko, looking guiltily at me. The commandant refused all my requests and demanded that I did not interfere with his work. Then I told him that on the outskirts of the city is the headquarters of our division, and I will have to go there and report to the division commander about what happened, especially since the division had heavy losses in previous battles and every soldier counts. I resolutely headed for my wagon. The commandant, after a moment's hesitation, signalled for me to approach him. When I approached, he already peacefully told me not to get excited, give your soldiers, let them help load the wagons, and then I'll let Kushenko go. I had to agree. For 3 or 4 hours, all my scouts loaded the wagons. The situation was unclear. The city was in the front line, artillery cannonade was clearly heard, and sometimes machine gun bursts, and the commandant was in a hurry to quickly fulfill the order received to take out musical instruments, obviously some music school. Finally, he let Kushenko go, and we quickly left the city towards the front. Kushenko told how he had learned from one of the residents that not far from where we had spent the night there was a central city market. Kushenko went there hoping to find a wheel there, and indeed found it. He took it off one of the Romanian wagons. He put the wheel on the wagon and drove towards the bazaar to look for us. On the wagon, besides other property, there was a barrel of honey. Somewhere the soldiers had gotten it earlier for themselves. Kushenko showed resourcefulness and began to exchange honey for wine. A queue quickly formed. In Romania there is a lot of wine. The front-line soldiers called Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia the Fifth Ocean, meaning the Sea of Wine. Some Jew tried to get in without queuing. Kushenko hit him on the head with a bailer. Lieutenant Colonel Altschuller, the commandant of the city, and a patrol appeared at the market. The offended Jew, having learned that Altschuller was also a Jew, complained to him. That's how Kushenko ended up in the commandant's office. I have dwelt in detail on this generally insignificant incident because it had further consequences, about which I will speak ahead. West of Timisoara, the enemy resisted our troops, trying to delay their advance. By September 27, 1944, our division reached the line of contact with the enemy. There were fierce battles for the villages of Pisac, Lavrin, Chandra, Bild, Bachikarakul. In these villages, the majority of the population were Germans, and they took part in the fighting on the side of the enemy. On October 5th, our division, together with other divisions of the 53rd Army, went on the offensive. The enemy stubbornly resisted. Around the villages for which we fought, there were vast fields of corn which reached 2 meters high. Because of it, it was difficult to fight, and for us artillerymen, even more so, as it was very difficult to observe the enemy and correct the fire of our batteries. Even before the beginning of the offensive one morning, Lieutenant Colonel Altschuller, the commandant of the city of Timisoara, came to me. I immediately thought something else my scouts had done when we spent the night in the city. Obviously something serious, otherwise he would need to go to the front line. The lieutenant colonel saw me and recognized me immediately. "I've seen you somewhere," he declared. I replied that I was seeing him for the first time. Then he, remembering the incident with Kushenko and honey, exclaimed, "Was it your scout who was selling honey in the city?" I replied that we were in battles all the time and had no time to trade. In a conciliatory tone, he said, "All right, don't take offence. Things happen at the front. I have been appointed to you deputy commander of the regiment in the political department. I came to get acquainted. And let's forget about what happened in the city." I was satisfied with such a conversation, although I thought that at the first opportunity he would probably remind me about honey. But these fears were not justified. Until the end of the war, he never once reminded me of it. Moreover, he turned out to be a kind-hearted man. When after the war we lived in Nizhnyudinsk, his room in the dormitory was not far from ours, and he sometimes helped me and my mother with groceries. In one of the post-war meetings of fellow soldiers, I reminded Mark Ilyich, that was Altshulla's name, about this episode. We laughed heartily, remembering the dashing scout Kushenko and a flask of honey. He said that when he was appointed commandant of the city, they gave him only 2 soldiers, the rest had to get himself, so he detained various intruders who had fallen behind their units. There were fierce battles for the named villages. Local inhabitants of German nationality were intimidated by Hitlerites. They say Russians will take revenge on them, leaving not a single alive, neither men nor women nor children nor old people. Therefore the resistance was fierce, many houses were burning. Late in the evening we entered one of the villages. Not a living soul. Empty houses. We went into one of them, decided to rest here, at least to sleep for 2 or 3 hours. I just fell asleep when I was awakened by a scout who was standing guard. In the window I could see the glow of fire. The neighbouring house was burning. We had to leave. The house we were in was starting to burn. It seems that someone deliberately sets fire to houses in order to accuse our troops of atrocities and vandalism. We leave to the outskirts of the village, and there, in hastily dug trenches, we spend time until morning. And in the morning, the attack again. Only our 3rd Regiment lost here 58 men killed and 185 wounded. Fighting hard with large enemy forces in the area northwest of Timisoara, our division, in cooperation with other army units, defeated them and came to the Romanian-Hungarian border near the town of Arad. On October 8th, the paratroopers came out of the battle and marched on the territory of Hungary in the direction of the city of Kartsag, past about 150 kilometers. The division turned into battle order, preparing for the offensive on the city. The tank corps arrived, about 100 tanks turned around, and are preparing with us to attack the enemy. At dawn we rise to the attack. Our paratroopers with a shout of hurrah rush forward. Tanks from the place are firing at the enemy. Soon the forward chain came to the outskirts of the city, took the first houses. The enemy fiercely resisted. Our tanks are obviously afraid to enter the city. There their maneuver is limited. In addition, from around every corner you can get a grenade or shell. Someone from the tank commanders, cursing ungodly, drives the tanks forward. They move reluctantly and slowly towards the city. We are following the paratroopers on the city street. Houses are destroyed in some places, then in one place, then in another. Fierce fights with the enemy break out. This is a usual battle for the city, when success depends on who sees the enemy earlier, opens fire faster and more accurately. The enemy cannot withstand our onslaught and withdraws, fiercely snapping back with rifle and machine gun fire. In the battles for the town of Kartsag, one of our gun commanders, Meshcheryagin, died. His gun was deployed near an important crossroads where the enemy was retreating. The calculation entered into unequal confrontation, one gun against the whole column of the enemy. The gun crew shot Hitlerites in cold blood. When the gunner died, Meshcheryagin himself stood up to the panorama and continued to fire. The enemy bullet cut short the life of the hero. Meshcheryagin was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. From October 6th to October 28th, our division, as part of the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front, took part in the Debrecen operation, one of the episodes of which was the battle for the city of Kartsag. Having liberated the city, we continued the offensive. Our 2nd Division was attached to the 13th Guards Airborne Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Iskakov, Hero of the Soviet Union. The commander of our division, I.D. Savin, and I, with my scouts and communicators, were constantly near the regiment commander and the battery commanders were near the battalion commanders. The 13th Regiment was advancing on the Hungarian town of Csaba. Here there was a fairly large railroad station. Around the town the fields were sown with corn, quite tall, at any rate taller than a man's height. Even vehicles were completely hidden in its thickets. The regiment approached the railroad embankment that circled the town in a semicircle. On the rails stood a long echelon of freight cars more than a kilometre long. The tail of the echelon was on our side, and the head the enemy. That day the regiment was replenished with soldiers from the liberated regions of Ukraine and Moldavia who had just been drafted into the army. All of them were at the front for the first time, as they say, untrained. And this was the first battle for them. The soldiers dug small trenches right on the embankment near the wagons. At the back, 10 to 15 metres away, a cornfield began. The enemy shelled the railroad train, and soon several cars caught fire. Ammunition was in them. From the fireboxes with shells began to explode and fly in different directions with a wild squeal. The regiment was forced to move away from the embankment to a safe distance. Soon the Nazis began to fire on the regiment from machine guns of several armoured personnel carriers, which manoeuvred along the front and gave the inexperienced soldiers the impression that there were many of them. In addition, the firing was done with bursting bullets. Hitting the corn stalks, the bullets exploded behind the soldiers of the regiment, which made it seem to the inexperienced soldiers that the enemy armoured personnel carriers in our rear were firing, because the sound of bursting was heard before the sound of the shot. Our untrained infantry began to withdraw. The matter was complicated by the fact that in the corn soldiers saw the nearest 2 or 3 neighbours, the rest were hidden in dense thickets. Panic mood was created. Someone shouted in fright that the Germans were behind them, surrounding them. Soldiers began to quickly retreat back, and in some places even to flee. Panic at the front is a very dangerous phenomenon, and if it covers even a part of the soldiers, it can quickly develop into a general flight, which is very difficult to stop. So it was here. Our temporary NP was located in the ditch of the highway, behind a cornfield. Regimental Commander Iskakov, with a Mauser in his hand, and 3 officers of the CP, stood in the way of the regiment's soldiers. Seeing that they could not cope with the runners, Iskakov started waving his hands at us, asking us to help stop the regiment. We quickly stood in the way of the retreating troops. We grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, gave him a couple of slaps on the neck, and forced him to lie down here and dig in. Iskakov fired his Mauser several times to make the especially cowardly ones lie down. With difficulty we managed to stop those running in panic. Iskakov had to shoot 2 or 3 of them. The men were mad with fear, shouting Germans, and did not respond to any commands. A few more officers and experienced sergeants came up, caught the escaped men in the corn, brought them back to the chain, forced them to entrench themselves. Gradually the panic stopped. The soldiers buried themselves in the ground, guiltily and shamefully looking at us. They sit in the trenches, and we calmly walk ahead of them, not paying attention to the machine gun bursts of the enemy firing to frighten them. Iskakov, not shy in expressions, explains the situation to the soldiers, shaming cowards. The experienced reconnaissance teams sent forward hit several armoured personnel carriers, and one of them was even captured in good condition and brought to the regiment. By evening the regiment restored the fighting order, occupying their own trenches along the railroad line. Wagons continued to burn, boxes with flares began to burst. From the burning cars flew out sheaves of multicoloured rockets, a real fireworks display. We had to withdraw the soldiers to a safe distance. In the morning the station and the town of Csaba were taken by the regiment. The 13th Regiment was tasked to secretly raid the rear of the enemy and deliver ammunition and fuel for vehicles to the encircled units of the 6th Cavalry Corps. The corps had broken through to the area of Hajisoboslo, where it was surrounded, and fought a fierce battle with the enemy. The 1st Battalion of the 13th Guards Airborne Regiment, under the command of Major Bilov, skillfully manoeuvring and not getting involved in the battle with the enemy, managed at night to go to the area of the encircled corps and bring a column of more than 60 vehicles with ammunition and fuel. I remember this raid well. Bypassing populated areas, camouflaging in the corn, we were able to successfully accomplish this task. Cavalrymen hugged and kissed our soldiers and officers for saving them from certain death. Continuing to fight maneuver battles, we soon took the major industrial city of Hungary Debrecen. Pursuing the retreating enemy, we soon came to the river Tissa. The width of the river is not less than 100 meters, quite deep and very fast. It was a serious obstacle. Along its banks stretched continuous dikes, protecting the surrounding countryside from floods. The 13th Regiment, supported by our division, captured 2 bridgeheads on the opposite bank of the river. The Germans launched frantic attacks, trying to destroy the units that had crossed. Both bridgeheads, small in front and in depth, were shot through by the enemy with rifle and machine gun fire. We focused all our attention on the enemy and our units on the bridgehead. This is all the more necessary because the battery commanders on the other side literally cannot raise their heads and stick their heads out of the trench to observe targets and fire. This task is performed by us, although we are separated by only 250 to 300 meters. Fierce fighting has been going on for several days, only when the enemy fire subsides at night, and only for a short time we manage to ferry the wounded from the other side and transfer other units and ammunition there. The terrain in the vicinity of our base is literally ploughed over with shells and mines, shot through with multiple layers of rifle and machine gun fire. Not infrequent raids by enemy aircraft, which descending to extremely low altitudes, bombing our trenches and shelling them with guns and machine guns. We run from one knee of the trench to the other, hiding behind the turns from the machine gun and cannon fire of the enemy aviation. Usually at this point the enemy on the opposite bank goes into counterattacks, and we have to be in position to open barrage fire in time. For 2 weeks we cannot break the resistance of the Nazis, and they cannot throw us off the bridgehead. Every day from early morning until late evening there are fierce attacks from our side and from the enemy. The enemy has strongly fortified the nearest villages Tissa, Tissa, turning them into powerful strongholds, and our troops cannot take them. We broke into the dam right at the water's edge, the restless Tissa bubbling and gurgling below. The rains have recently fallen, the water has arrived, besides, the foothills are nearby, and the current is quite strong. Every new day the enemy usually begins with a strong fire attack on the bridgehead, ploughing literally every metre of land. It seems that nothing alive can survive there. We also get to us. We are separated by some 100 meters. Some shells and mines fall on our bank. It is especially difficult when enemy aviation arrives. Our fighters are tied up in a fight with German fighters, and bombers bomb our positions quite calmly and with aim. We lie in a trench and watch every bomb. We have already got used to it, and unmistakably determine where the next bomb will fall. If it is exactly on our trenches, we jump up and run to another place, of course, along the trench. To jump out is out of the question. Bombs are bursting all around. Shrapnel is whistling. Machine gun and cannon lines from airplanes. Without exaggeration, if there is a hell, it is here at this moment. The ground trembles from explosions, howling with a wild roar of airplanes and bombs. The Germans equip them with special choppers, which when falling make a heartbreaking sound. And if there are dozens of planes and many dozens of bombs, you can imagine what is happening on the ground. Fountains of water from the bombs that fell into the river, mixed with fountains of earth on the shore. The shock wave from the bombs bursting nearby presses you into the ground and buries you in the trenches, or lifts you off the ground and throws you to the side. You feel like a defenseless bug in a raging sea of fire and smoke. The raid lasts for a few minutes, which each time seems like an eternity. It's like this several times a day. The next raid has just ended. The smoke and dust have not yet had time to disperse, and we are already scrutinizing the opposite shore. There, as a rule, under the cover of bombing, another attack on the positions of our units begins. It is impossible for those on the other bank to stick their noses out of the trench. As they say a continuous sea of fire, smoke, bullets and shrapnel. Our task is to detect in time the direction of the next enemy attack and to give a command to the firing positions of the batteries to open barrage fire, and then to correct the firing, to make corrections in the sight and direction of firing in accordance with the direction of movement of the attacking enemy in his battle orders. I think that the Germans are not sweet from our fire either. Dozens of powerful bursts of 122 mm and 76 mm shells burst in the Hitlerites' fighting order, hitting enemy infantry and tanks with shrapnel and shock wave, which are fired by guns that are on direct fire. We have become accustomed to this character and tension of each day of battle, and if sometimes there is a lull, it is alarming. We must keep our eyes open. Obviously, the enemy is regrouping his forces for another attack. It is necessary to determine the enemy's intentions. Report to your commander. If you figure out the enemy's intentions, open a timely and accurate fire on him, then you are on the horse, and if the enemy still attacks, it is already considerably weakened, and, probably, to some extent demoralized. When it gets dark, under the cover of darkness we start evacuation of wounded from the bridgehead, ferrying to the bridgehead replenishment with men, ammunition, food. It is necessary to feed the survivors, to give appropriate instructions for the next day of battle. Soldiers need to tidy up their weapons, clean and lubricate them, repair the destroyed sections of the trenches, repair broken communication lines and many other tasks to be solved, while the German is silent. It is necessary, of course, and rest. People are not iron, and the fighting has been going on for many days. For the battles on the Tissa in the 13th Guards Airborne Regiment, which we supported, 3 were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the regiment commander Lieutenant Colonel Iskakov, who controlled the unit from our NP, Company Commander Junior Lieutenant M. K. Stepanov, a bullet gunner. K. Stepanov, machine gunner A. Abutalimov, who shortly before had been expelled from our division to join the 13th Regiment, because he did not know Russian and was not suitable for service in the artillery regiment. The others were given a commendation. In these battles on the Tissa only our division lost more than 1,000 men, including 268 killed. We got this frontier at a high price. On November 3rd, 1944, our division surrendered to the neighbours its defence strip together with the bridgehead, made a 30th kilometre march, and took the defence site near the town of Tissa Fjord, to the west of the former site. Here, as part of the 57th Rifle Corps of the 53rd Army, we took part in the Budapest operation. And again we had to force Tissa. For a week there were heavy fights on a small bridgehead, which was captured by our troops on the opposite bank of the river Tissa. The Germans continuously counterattacked our positions, trying to throw us off the bridgehead. It is so small that it is shot through with rifle and machine gun fire. Only on November 5th there were 12 enemy counterattacks on the bridgehead. Sometimes it comes to hand combat. Hitlerites in a drunken attack climb to the breach. Our paratroopers meet them with fire from automatic rifles, machine guns, rifles, often hand grenades go into battle. Unfortunately, we, artillerymen, can't help much here. Combat orders, both ours and the enemy's, are close to each other, and if we fire directly at the attackers, we can hit our own. But we still manage to shoot, pulling the bursts of our shells closer to the place of the enemy's attack. The bursts of our shells are not far from our position, and we, even in the continuous rumble of battle, can hear our shells flying over our heads with a characteristic whistling sound on the final part of the trajectory. The bursts of our shells are so close to our NP that we involuntarily pull our head into our shoulders, although over the years of war we have become accustomed to such sounds. Where the enemy counterattacks, there is a sea of fire, dust and smoke. The ground is literally boiling. The infernal rumble of bursting shells and mines, the squeal of shrapnel and the whistling of bullets, the shots of guns and mortars, the wild screaming of attackers and defenders, all this merged into a terrible symphony of brutal battle. And so from morning to evening every day for many days now. Only by late evening does the rumble of battle subside. Everyone is dead tired, the barrels of guns, machine guns, automatic rifles are red hot from the firing. It seems that the earth itself is tired. On the night of November 6th to 7th, 1944, the 6th and 13th Guards Airborne Regiments of our division crossed the bridgehead. In the morning of November 7th, the division, in cooperation with the 3rd Independent Assault Regiment, supported by Division Artillery and Assault Aviation, launched a decisive attack, surrounded and defeated the enemy near the village of Poroslo, destroying a large number of enemy personnel and equipment. The whole area was literally strewn with enemy corpses, but many of our soldiers and officers were killed here. The enemy could not withstand the onslaught of our troops and began to hastily withdraw. Hungarian soldiers, who were fighting on the side of the Germans, began to come to our side and surrendered as prisoners. On November 18th, the division, acting on the right flank of the Budapest group of troops of the Second Ukrainian Front, captured the large Hungarian village of Kirecend. It stretched for many kilometers along the highway. In the evening, our paratroopers entrenched themselves behind the village, saddling the highway. With me, platoon commanders of battery control platoons with scouts and communicators. We settled in a roadside ditch. The scouts dug me a small trench, brought a featherbed from the village, wrapped in which I spent the cold night. Our infantry on the other side of the road, also in the ditch. Early in the morning, when it was not yet dawn, I was called by the battalion commander and warned that in an hour the battalion would go on the attack. Ahead, the Matra Mountains and the Hungarian city of Eger. There lies our way. Everything is clear. We have to raise the platoon commanders, who are here in the ditch, buried in the same featherbeds as mine, sleeping sweetly. We have to get the batteries ready to support the battalion's attack with fire. On the road, in the fog, I see the figures of the deputy commander of our regiment, Major Gordichuk, and the deputy commander of our division, Captain Yurchenko. They are standing on the highway and talking about something about 3 or 4 meters away from me. I leaned over the trench, waking the platoon commander of the 4th Battery, Lieutenant Volodya Diminsky. In another ditch I heard a loud, strong swearing. Obviously someone in the battalion had overslept. Immediately from the side of the enemy a machine gun line sounded in our direction. It even seemed that the machine gun was somewhere nearby, about 50 to 70 meters away. Obviously it was a combat guard of the Germans. Bullets snapped on the stones of the highway, ricocheting off them with a screech. Someone pushed me in the back, and I fell into the trench to Diminsky. Luckily it was shallow. I looked back who pushed me, but there was no one around. Yurchenko looked anxiously in my direction and asked, "Are you alive?" I answered, "Alive." And at that moment I felt a lingering pain in my back. I was in a cotton trench coat. I felt a hole in my cotton coat with my finger, pulled my finger out. There was blood on it. I realized that I was wounded. I felt some unpleasant weakness in my body. My scouts realized what was the matter, lifted me up, supporting me up in my arms. At that moment appeared our division commander, Capt. D. Savin, and began to scold the platoon that I was hurt because of them. I asked not to scold the platoon. They were not guilty of anything. Savin gave the command to take me to the village to the PMP of the regiment. The scouts led me to the village. My heart ached. Would I really be sent to the hospital and have to part with the regiment, with which I had travelled so many front roads? Obviously, because of the weakness, he even cried with annoyance. In the medical station I was quickly stripped to the waist, laid on the table with my stomach, and started picking at the wound. I heard the doctor dictating to the nurse, who wrote down my name and diagnosis in the journal blind bullet wound in the area of the 5th vertebra. I was given 2 unpleasant tetanus shots, bandaged and sent with the scouts to the stables, where there were other wounded men waiting to be sent to the division's infirmary and field hospitals. On one side of the stable stood the horses, and on the other side on the straw lay us. The wounded are patiently waiting for dispatch. Some are here for the 2nd day. There is practically no one to take care of them. Sometimes a soldier sanitarian will run in, bring water or food and run on. The fighting is heavy, and the wounded come in a steady stream. I lay down for a while, thought, and decided to return to the regiment. Apparently my wound was not very serious, and the prospect of lying here for 2 or 3 days did not please me at all. One of my scouts was with me all the time, waiting to find out where I would be taken. I gave him a task to run to the headquarters of our division. Good thing it is in the same village, on the outskirts, to take a wagon for me to return to the division. He was happy with my decision and quickly went to the division headquarters. The wounded are moaning. Some are delirious when the transport will come for them. No one knows. It rains almost every day. The roads have become muddy, and the transport moves with great difficulty. Soon my scout came running and 2 others with him. They took me under their arms and led me to the wagon. There was a luxurious phaeton with a leather top, inside it a mountain of pillows and blankets. Soon I was in the division. The guys in the division met me joyfully. Of course, they had an occasion to wash my return. Lieutenant Shemendyuk, our horse doctor and my friend from Szpol, took to treat me. He said that he would not trust our divisional paramedic Vasya Lisniansky to treat his friend. When I saw his syringes intended for horses, I protested. You could stab a ram with such a syringe. The protest was rejected, and Shemendiuk got down to business. I must give justice, he took his duties seriously, and my treatment was successful. November 27th was my birthday. I was 21 years old. The weather was overcast, drizzling fine rain. In the morning everything around was drowned in thick fog. We could not hear the usual sounds of the front. The firing subsided. Impenetrable mud blocked the roads. Soon our platoon members, having learned that it was my birthday, came to my hut, where I was passing the time undergoing treatment. They immediately pulled me to the table, put out a simple snack American stew, lard, bread, etc. Naturally, a bottle of alcohol appeared on the table. Generally speaking, I was not fond of alcohol. To some extent I was indifferent to it. This sometimes caused bewilderment and even discontent of those who were not stupid to drink. I had to support the company. I quickly became tipsy and fell asleep. I was weak after the wound. Platoon members continued to drink. They were already drunk, and, as always in such a situation, lost all control over themselves. Drinking was not enough, so they decided to go to the infantry to drink wine, and there was plenty of it in the Hungarian stone bunkers. Not far from the firing positions of one of our batteries, a large stone bunker had been cut into the rock, and there were up to a dozen huge oak barrels with grape wine in them. Each such barrel apparently contained at least 1,000 litres of wine. The entrance to the bunker was closed by a massive wide door that faced our rear, and this entrance was clearly visible from the firing position of one of our batteries. The headquarters of our 13th Guards Airborne Regiment was located here. The bunker had several compartments. In the farthest of them was the office of the Chief of Staff of the regiment. Platoon members, having come to the basement, shot several barrels with pistols, tasting the wine. The wine was young, sour, and the platoon simply did not realize what they were doing. The wine was gushing out of the barrels in tight fountains. Stupefied from drinking, platoon members put their mouths and then their heads, savouring and washing themselves with the heady drink. Soon in the bunker, from which the clerks of the headquarters scattered after the pistol shots of our heroes, the wine was already above the ankle. Platoon members waded through it, scooped it up with their hats, pouring it on each other, losing all control over themselves. After one of the shots, the regimental chief of staff, who was sleeping on a table in the far compartment, woke up. Seeing that the bunker was almost knee-deep in wine, he went out into the next compartment and saw all our drunken crowd. One by one he shoved them down their necks, slapped each of them, and called our division commander to take his drunken horde away. The platoons, offended by the improper reception in the infantry, ran to the firing position with as much speed as possible in that condition. The commander of one of the platoons on the run gave the command battery to battle, turned the gun to the right towards the bunker. The gun crew, not knowing what was going on, took the command at face value. In the fog one could expect any trick from the enemy. The command sounds on the bunker, fragmentation grenade, aim 50, aim at the gate. The squad carries out the command, but the gun commander realized that the lieutenant was stupefied from drinking and did not know what he was doing. He quickly removed the wedge from the gun and hid it. Platoon commands fire, but no shot is fired. Enraged platoon rushes to the gun, but the calculation at the command of the commander of the gun twisted it. Then came the division commander, quickly put order all the drunks put in carts and sent to the NP, which was located in the mountains in the attic of one of the houses. Here our heroes were unloaded in the stables, and when they woke up, or rather slept, the division commander announced penalties to all of them and sent them to the firing line, threatening that if he learned about such mischief, he would send the guilty to the infantry. This was already a serious warning, and as far as I know, we had no more of this kind of mischief. This is how our platoon brothers celebrated my birthday. It was unpleasant for me, although I was not directly involved in these events. November ended, December came. We continued heavy fighting in the Matra Mountains. In the first days of December, the division surrendered its line to another unit and, having made a 100-kilometre march, went directly to Budapest from the north side, bypassing the Matra Mountains. I was soon appointed commander of the 4th Battery, in which I had previously been a platoon commander. In the area of Budapest are strong fighting. The enemy, concentrating in a narrow area large forces of infantry and tanks, crushed our defences south of the city, in the area of the famous Lake Balaton, and rushed to the city. More than a week of heavy bloody fighting continued. The enemy was stopped and then defeated, but our losses were great. We were north of Budapest, but even here the fighting was fierce. Regiments of our division repeatedly broke into the enemy rear, made combat raids there, bringing panic to the enemy camp. Having smelled something wrong in their rear, the enemy, as a rule, quickly abandoned their positions at the front and rolled back to the west. Having defeated the German troops in the Budapest area, our units rushed forward. But our losses were great. 3 battalion regiments became 2 battalion regiments. The personnel, who had been in continuous fighting for a long time, were very tired. The intensity of the battles and their fierce nature is also evidenced by the fact that only for 2 months of fighting in Hungary in our division, in the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, was awarded to 15 soldiers and commanders, while for all previous and subsequent battles, that is, more than 2 years of fighting, this title was awarded to only 8 people. Continuing to fight with the enemy in the mountains of Matra, often acting in his rear in isolation from the rest of the army in winter snowstorms and cold, especially noticeable in the mountains, by the end of December 1944 our division came to the valley of the River Ipeľ, bordering with Czechoslovakia. Ahead of Czechoslovakia, the direction to the town of Lucenic. December 1944, the 4th year of the war is coming to an end. How tiresome it is. Worn out by continuous battles, ragged, dirty, half-starved, tired to the limit, we wander in battalion columns through the mountain valleys towards Czechoslovakia. The enemy sometimes snaps back. We had to deploy in combat order and start another attack. The battalion, which I support with my battery, is barely a company in numbers. I am always next to the battalion commander, with me the control platoon headed by its commander, Lieutenant Dimiński. 2 firing platoons led by the senior officer of the battery moving rolls from one firing position to another in readiness to fire guns to support the actions of the battalion. There are only 276 MMZs, 3 guns left in the battery. According to the staff there should be 4, but the guns are not enough. The battery, as a rule, supported the 1st Battalion of the 13th Guards Airborne Regiment. The exception was when the battalion was taken to the 2nd echelon. The battery commander was with the battalion commander at all times, or at his NP, near the battalion CP. Then the battalion commander had a platoon commander of the control platoon, who by telephone informed the battery commander of the battalion commander's requests to support the battalion's actions with gunfire. At the same time, he informed on the battalion's actions. This occurred when visibility from the battalion CP was limited and did not allow the battalion to direct fire. When necessary, the battery moved to direct fire directly on the front line of the battalion. Shell consumption was strictly limited. Usually the battery was allowed to use 10 to 12 shells for a day of battle, which was enough to shoot one target from a closed position. We had to save shells strictly. On December 31st, 1944, we came close to the Czechoslovakian border, which in this area passed along a small river Ipeľ. Its width did not exceed 50 meters. On the opposite bank there was a rather large Slovak village. Our paratroopers took the initial position for the night attack. The battalion commander and I with my scouts settled down in the ditch of the highway. It was already quite dark, about 10 o'clock, when the battalion went on the attack. We jumped over the river on some kind of a fat footbridge. The enemy obviously did not expect that we would attack at night, and even on New Year's Eve. In general, the Germans all through the war accused us that the Russians were not fighting according to the rules. It is dark, we have to rest, and they go on the attack, or we have to have lunch, and they are fighting, etc. Often pedantry in these matters failed the Germans. The attack was almost silent, and the enemy, caught by surprise, did not offer organized resistance. We broke into the village, the infantry cleared house after house, street after street, catching the Germans, many of whom were already quite drunk on the occasion of the New Year. In honor of the New Year, we sipped from flasks right on the move, gave a volley from the gun and continued the offensive. I with the scouts went down into a large cellar under the church. The room is illuminated by the dim light of a wax candle. At a small table sits the priest, whispering prayers. Along the walls on benches sit nuns, with their heads wrapped in black clothes. From experience we knew that the Germans, not having time to escape, sometimes hid under the black clothes among the nuns. My scouts checked all those seated. Neither the priest nor the women objected. Everything turned out safely. There were no Germans in the cellar. Going out into the street, we looked into the house nearest the church, faintly lit by a candle. There was an almshouse there. The nun on duty tried to explain something to us, but we did not understand her. At our request to show us the room, she opened the door. What we saw in the dim candlelight horrified us. On the beds were squirming humanoid creatures, obviously ugly from birth. We quickly retreated from there. We continued to clean up this first Czechoslovak village until late at night on January 1st, 1945. Only in the very morning, having drunk a sip each time for the new year 1945, dead tired, we went to bed. The beginning of January 1945. Our 1st Guards Airborne Division was engaged in persistent manoeuvring battles with the enemy on the territory of Czechoslovakia, more precisely, in its eastern part Slovakia. A significant part of the Republic is mountains, the Slovak Ore Mountains that is their name. Our division was tasked to make a bypass manoeuvre along the southeastern slopes of the mountains, to go to the flank and rear of the grouping of enemy troops opposing our 53rd Army, to strike him and contribute to his defeat. Fulfilling the task, we approached a wide valley lying between the mountains. The entrance to the valley was covered by two heights 517 and 503. The nearest to us height 517 rose steeply upwards. Its slopes were densely covered with coniferous forest. Many large stones were scattered around. On the right, the height was a steep wall. On the enemy's side, its slopes were gentle, and there a field road led to its summit, which was used to transport the timber harvested there. Of course, we learned about it later, when we took the height. Hitlerites had a good view of the terrain on which we were advancing, and of course our fighting orders were shot through with aimed fire from all kinds of weapons. The weather was cold. During the day it often rained with wet snow, and at night it was freezing, and the height turned into an icy mountain. The enemy, realizing the importance of these heights, hastily fortified them, and by fire from all kinds of weapons foiled any attempt to approach them. We, the artillerymen, could not clear the way for our infantry with the fire of our guns, as they used to say. Here it was necessary to destroy machine gun nests of the enemy, who had settled on the top of the heights, by direct fire at close range. From afar, from a distance of 1 kilometre and farther, it was possible to hit a machine gun only by accident, and that with a large consumption of shells, which we could not afford. To pull the guns closer did not allow to shoot the angle of elevation, that is, the barrel of the gun could be raised only to a certain limit, and the targets were higher. In addition, the enemy fierce rifle and machine gun fire did not let close during daylight hours. By the end of the day, our paratroopers still managed to approach the height, but attempts to storm its summit each time ended in failure. The enemy successfully repelled the onslaught of our units, launching their armoured personnel carriers. Our paratroopers were preparing for a night assault. I was ordered by the battery to support the assault of the height and to ensure by fire its retention. This was possible only by direct fire. In other words, the guns had to be brought up to the icy height, which in addition had not yet been taken. Before that, during the day assault, they tried to raise the battalion 45 mm guns, but without success. The height was very steep, its slopes were covered with forest, there was no road, horses and men were literally exhausted, but they could not pull up the guns. This was to be done by us, and at night. It is very difficult to fight at night. In the darkness, it is difficult to orient oneself. One cannot see what actions the enemy is taking. It is not easy to control the battle. Only by the flashes of shots and by the sound of them we could somehow figure out where were our own, where were the strangers, because the Germans' automatic weapons had a different from our rate of fire. And we, artillerymen, in the night battle, especially when the situation is rapidly changing, in general to fire from guns extremely difficult, cannot see the targets. In addition, you can hit their own, especially when the battle is maneuverable. The Germans, as you know, at night constantly illuminated the approaches to their battle lines with rockets, and our units had to operate on the illuminated terrain. On the eve of the night assault on the height, I was called by the division commander, Captain Savin. It turns out that a correspondent of some newspaper and a photographer came to take pictures of the moment of setting the task of storming the height. I had to pose. Although my battery had the task to support the battalion, which was to storm the height, all the battery commanders and other officers of the division were filmed on the picture. But the picture was really taken directly in the battle order, on the approach to height 517 on the eve of its assault. It was already completely dark when our paratroopers began the assault. At first the battle was silent from stone to stone, from tree to tree. Trying not to give themselves away by noise, the paratroopers went up the slopes. It was necessary to get as close as possible to the enemy, who held the defence along the crest of the height. The Germans methodically launched missile after missile. This helped us to a certain extent. We could see where the enemy was. Besides, the terrain we were moving on was illuminated. Of course, we had to stop for a while, so that the enemy would not notice. Our infantry had difficulty climbing the icy slopes of the heights. In this situation, even the very idea of raising the guns on the height seemed ridiculous, or rather, an unreal task. But the success of the battle and the lives of many soldiers and officers depended on its solution. In addition to all the difficulties, it was necessary to keep silence until our infantry crawled close to the enemy and started a firefight. We had to raise at least one gun. I gave the command to start lifting. It's difficult to control 6 horses in such conditions. We're trying to pull with 4. Horses snort from excitement and tension. We rush forward a few meters. We immediately put stones under the wheels, preventing them from rolling backwards. A breather. Again a jerk, the horses fall on the icy slope, and the gun together with the horses and the squad roll back. The stones did not help either. Having consulted with the men, we removed the middle carry, leaving only 2 native horses. We put ropes behind the nearest trees to help them drag the tool. Another jerk, the horses fall down, breaking their knees and muzzles in blood. But they managed to move 2 to 3 meters, and most importantly to fix the gun. A few such jerks and 15 meters are overcome. Both animals and people are exhausted. They rested for a few minutes, and again they darted forward. Horses fall down, people fall down, the implement and the harness roll back, almost to the place from where they started to move. Again we have to start again. After another spurt, when the gun and harness began to roll backwards, the gun commander, a sergeant, I don't remember his surname, threw himself under the wheels of the gun in fever and despair. The gun, which weighed about 1.5 tons, ran over him with its wheels and rolled further. The soldiers of the regiment barely had time to snatch their commander from under the horse's hooves. The sergeant's bones were intact, but he was badly crushed. Still, he refused to go to the infirmary, but we did not know where he was. The gun hit a tree trunk and stopped. It became clear that we couldn't lift the gun that way. We had to find another solution. We decided to give up horses and try to lift the gun with men only. We attached 2 straps to each wheel, similar to Berlatsky straps. They are part of the standard equipment of artillerymen. The gun was turned forward, and all the men of the battery were placed side by side. The straps were put behind the nearest trees, others behind other trees ahead of the gun. A command sounded quietly, a jerk. The gun moved up the slope by 3 or 4 meters and stopped, securely held by straps. The 2 lower straps, freed, lead behind the trees ahead of the gun. Again we jerked, and again we managed to move up 3 or 4 meters. By incredible efforts we managed to climb up the slope for 200 meters. That's a clear success, but the men were literally exhausted and lay next to the gun on the icy slope. By this time our paratroopers have engaged in a fierce battle with the enemy. There, obviously, it came to hand combat. Hand grenades are flying from above, some of them reach us. Germans from above conveniently throw them down. The fight is fierce, persistent, cruel. Everyone understands that the possibility of further advance of the division depends on its outcome. By the middle of the night, our paratroopers managed to dislodge the enemy from his positions and gain a foothold at the very edge of the height. The enemy moved back about 200 meters and poured strong rifle and machine gun fire on our units. The infantry is entrenched and does not dare to advance further ahead as open terrain. probably a forest clearing. Only some trees are visible in the transparent light of flares. Fire from enemy machine guns and automatic rifles' tracer bullets slices myriads of sparks out of the rocks, creating such a fireworks display that even the thought of the need to move forward seems ridiculous, reckless. However, our infantry is not going to further test fate, began to consolidate, laying themselves bunkers of stones and answering the enemy machine gun fire. It was understandable. The soldiers had done all they could dead tired. They fell between the stones and fell asleep. After all, it was the second half of the night, and in the morning they would attack again. While the fight was going on, my artillerymen managed to pull up the second gun as well, but there was no way of positioning them for firing. In order to position the guns, at least a small area was needed where the guns could be deployed for firing. The only possibility was to move forward into neutral territory, that is, between one's own troops and the enemy. I think there is no need to explain what this threatened. We could lose both guns and calculations and fail to fulfill the task. We had to decide what to do. Having consulted with platoon and gun commanders, I decided to take a firing position ahead of our infantry, 20 to 25 meters away. The calculations crawled to the chosen place to quietly prepare platforms for the guns, to remove unnecessary stones, to lay at least a low bunker to protect from bullets and splinters. I asked the paratroopers to cover us with fire, if necessary. By dawn the sites were prepared and even camouflaged in front with snow. Trying not to create unnecessary noise, we rolled the guns to the position, brought them to the battle, camouflaged them as best we could. It is necessary to give people at least an hour of rest. A day of heavy fighting is ahead, and my soldiers were storming the height all night. I reported to the battalion commander, Major Belov, that the battery had taken a firing position on neutral territory. He did not believe it at first. Such a decision was quite unexpected and risky. Slowly dawn comes. It's cold. The soldiers are squirming between the rocks, trying to somehow warm up. Around each gun there was a low wall, 50 to 60 centimeters, at least a little protecting the crews from bullets and splinters, of course, if you lie on the ground. As far as conditions and possibilities allowed, the positions of the guns were camouflaged with clods of snow. The sky is gloomy, low clouds hide the sun's rays, everything around is drowned in grey gloom. Quiet, no shots are heard, even the usual German flares have ceased to plough through the darkness. My artillerymen, tucked in wherever they could, are dozing, tired from a difficult sleepless night. Even the statutory gun ditches for sheltering the crew and ammunition did not have time to equip. In such close proximity to the enemy it was dangerous to chisel stony ground with crowbars and pickaxes. It could attract the attention of the enemy, and for us now the main trump card in the battle was surprise. He does not expect us to have guns at such a height. We are lying between the guns in the rocks, the cold is getting to our bones and there is practically nowhere to warm up. We squeeze against each other, falling asleep, and soon wake up again from the cold. Soon mortar bursts rumbled a sure sign of the approaching Hitlerite attack. Most of the mines burst somewhere behind us down below, only some bursts ahead of us, showering us with shrapnel and pieces of frozen snow. My calculations are in full readiness to fire. Soon the figures of enemy soldiers glimmer between the trees, yelling something and firing bursts of automatic rifles and machine guns, encouraging themselves with shots. Our defense responds with friendly rifle and machine gun and mortar fire. My artillerymen have no suitable target yet. It is pointless to fire a gun at an individual soldier. You will only find yourself before the time. Enemy chains approached already 150 meters, but the dense fire of our infantry forced them to lie down. Soon between the trees in the morning haze appeared German armoured personnel carriers. They are not visible. They are hiding behind bushes and large rocks, pouring from machine guns our battle orders. Gunners are hastily scouring enemy positions with panoramas, trying to catch an enemy armoured personnel carrier in their sights. Powerfully sounds the shot of the first gun. The gunner still caught the silhouette of the armoured personnel carrier in the sight. The shot was so strong and unexpected that both our side and the German side for a while fell silent, stunned by this rumble. The shell had evidently reached its target. In the morning haze it is difficult to see, but some confusion in the enemy is noticeable. Soon the enemy opened a furious machine gun fire, trying to grope the gun position. But the shot was so unexpected, and the flame of the shot must have blinded the enemy observers. At any rate, it seems that the position of the gun exactly they did not have time to detect bullets explode the ground, then ahead of the battalion's defence, then whistling above our heads. Our battalion is preparing to attack the enemy. The battalion's manpower is less than 30% of its authorised strength. A fluid chain of our soldiers rose to the attack. Did not pass in 50 metres, as the enemy's strong fire from machine guns pinned our infantry to the ground. It was impossible to dig in, solid stone. The battalion began to retreat back to the former positions. There is at least some shelter from the bullets. A few tens of minutes passed, sluggish firing from both sides, but soon enemy mortars started to work, mines slammed, scattering splinters and stones, a sure sign of another enemy attack. Once again, German soldiers flashed between the trees. Armoured personnel carriers, hiding behind trees and rocks, pouring machine gun fire on our defence. I shout with all my might to the gun commanders to look for their positions, however, they themselves know it well. I scold my scouts, who have not yet found the place from where the armoured personnel carriers are firing. Platoon commander sent to company commanders for the same purpose. Enemy infantry obviously came to the attack line, to which meters 150 to 170, which means that the attack will soon begin. The enemy did not make himself wait. Enemy mines burst frequently, shrapnel flying with a shriek over the rocks behind which we were hiding. Machine guns of armoured personnel carriers started to work. One after another, the shots of my guns sounded powerfully. We shoot at random, to the place where machine gun bursts can be heard. The armoured personnel carriers are manoeuvring all the time to avoid being shot by the guns. Their fire has become much weaker, but there is still no direct line of sight to the German vehicles. The enemy infantry rose to the attack. A rather dense chain began to rapidly approach our positions. German soldiers have obviously received a fair portion of schnapps. You can hear their drunken shouts. Our infantry is firing desperately with rifles, automatic rifles and several machine guns. The distance is rapidly closing. Something has to be done, as my guns are ahead of our infantry. A few shots from the guns on the attacking enemy do not give tangible results. Shells burst somewhere among the chain. How to stop the enemy infantry? This thought beats feverishly in my head. I realize that my decision is waiting for the battery, and it depends on him whether we stop the enemy or have to withdraw. And what about the guns? You can't take them on your shoulder. I had a saving thought I should aim at the trees, at the lower branches. With all my might in the rumble of battle, I shouted about it to the gun commanders. They understood with half a word. Quick aiming, shots, shells, with the fuse set for instantaneous action, burst in the lower branches of the nearest trees. Shell splinters densely shower the enemy infantry. A dozen shots and the attack is stopped. The ground is strewn with corpses of Hitlerites. The survivors lay down. A few more shots, and the enemy began to pull back. It's time for our infantry to counterattack. Anxiety left from the heart. The infantry amicably rose, on the run throwing scanty praise to us, artillerymen. They are perceived as the most precious reward. Fighting brotherhood and mutual support in battle were valued above all then. Our infantry successfully attacked, and the enemy could not withstand the onslaught. My guns continued to fire at the enemy's firing points, but it was already clear that we had taken the height. With a sense of accomplished duty, I went to the battalion commander, Major Belov, but it turned out that he was wounded, and instead of him another, it seems, his deputy. Scant praise for the artillerymen,